Okay, so a thank you to Your Honor Judge Baumgarten, who forwarded an article to me. Right, the article read, hundreds of Torontonian from Toronto Jews from all types of backgrounds flooded the Canada Life building on November 1st, 2017, filling the long corridor and jamming into the largest courtroom. We came for one purpose, to support a Jewish life. Yochai Shalom Netanel Unanu suffered a severe asthma attack that led to cardiac arrest on September 27th. The ambulance did not reach him in time and he slipped into a coma. At Toronto's Humber River Hospital, he was connected to respirators and remained unresponsive. In the weeks that followed, he was never alone. His family members kept him company by his bedside. The doctors pronounced him brain dead and issued a death certificate, since the provincial medical community defined death as the cessation of brain functions. The doctors wanted to unplug him on Yom Kippur, saying the hospital can offer no further treatment, but the family and the rabbis fought to keep him on the respirator. Under Jewish law, we will discuss that soon, and in accordance to Shalom's belief, Shalom is alive, and the application of the brain of the criteria expressly violates Shalom's religious beliefs, and thus discriminated against him based on his religion. Read a statement by Max Unanu, his father. Shalom seeks an accommodation as a matter of human rights and the constitutional law that allows his Jewish beliefs to be considered and accommodated in determining when death occurs. A hearing was issued to resolve this opposition. The day before it took place, a letter circulated through social media to the Jewish community pleading for Jews to come and support Shalom. I took the hour-long trek to downtown, not I, but I'm reading the article, to downtown Toronto with several other women. We put to see busloads of yeshiva boys streaming to the building. We followed them and collided with the crowd as soon as we exited the elevator. Hundreds of people abandoned their regular schedules and came to this hearing. Everyone there felt the power each individual can make. No one said, I'm only one person. It won't matter whether I come or not. In a court case fighting for religious freedom, we demonstrated the united power of religion. Standing in that cramped corridor, I was surrounded by throngs of people who shared the same goal, to save Shalom's life. Beyond the fear and tension of the situation, we unanimously felt uplifted and inspired. How could the judge deny the will of hundreds of supporters crammed in the hallway? The hearing began late. Many people stayed until the end, 2 hours later. They, like me, were not leaving until we hear the resolution. We won. The judge, Mr. Justice Hanley, ruled that Shalom should not be removed from life support, at least until the case is fully resolved, and the doctors cannot withhold any treatment that can improve his condition. Judge Hanley made it clear that every medical personnel in that ward must be aware of this ruling, giving liability to the head doctors so no one can unplug the patient, quote-unquote, accidentally. After the hearing, Charles Wagner, the lawyer that represents the League for Human Rights of B'nai B'rith Canada and the Vada Rabbanim of Toronto, said, this is only the beginning. Shalom may be on life support for now, but there will be a long case ahead to fight for this law that could take years. He expects the case to reach the Supreme Court. Okay. So, the medical world, as of today, considers brain death to be death. And therefore, based on that, as we saw what they wanted to do in Toronto, there's no point in continuing to administer any medical maintenance, sustaining respirators, whatever it might be. And this has halachic Jewish law implications when it comes to, as we saw in this case, pulling the plug, as it's colloquially called. Also has very much to do with organ transplants, right? Which is another topic that we discussed, dealt in and of itself. But as it relates to this, as of now, the heart is only eligible for a transplant if it's taken while it's still beating. How can you possibly take a beating heart from one person to give it to another person? It will save the other person, but isn't that killing the first person? Well, medically, legally, if the person is pronounced brain dead, even though the heart is beating, he is considered to be dead. Again, I'm not saying halacha yet. We'll delve into that soon. Medically, legally, the heart is beating, but the patient is dead. And therefore, there's no problem in taking out the heart and giving it to someone else that will save their life. Now, as important as we view saving a life is, as we'll soon see from the very first source that we will deal with, however, not at the expense of terminating someone else's life. So the question is, from a halachic Jewish viewpoint, how is brain death viewed? What is that considered to be? Is the person dead? Now, for us, death means the neshama, the soul, has left. How do we measure that? Obviously, we can't measure that. We have no means of measuring that. So what is the halachic Jewish determination of the point, the time of death? And how does brain death play into that? Now, up until the 1950s, death was defined as, and I'm quoting here, and I thank Rabbi Howard Jachter, an old friend, acquaintance, colleague of mine, for his article that I'm basing this off of. Total stoppage of the circulation of the blood and a cessation of the animal and virtual functions consequent thereupon, such as respiration, pulsation. That was the original definition, an accepted point of death. Total stoppage of the circulation of blood and other functions such as respiration, pulsation. At that point, secular law did not consider death to take place earlier than Jewish law considered it to take place. In fact, in the late 18th century, pressure was put on the Jewish community of Germany to delay burial for 3 days due to the non-Jews' concern that an individual might return to life. The Chatam Sofer, will soon see his teshuvah, his responsa, strongly opposed adopting the non-Jewish standard of death, declaring, all the winds of the world will not move us from the standards established by our Torah. See, we have a competing value, right? The non-Jews, their value was he might come back to life. We have a competing value of halanat hamet, which is delaying the burial. Once the person has died, our understanding is that the person, well, in terms of kavod, honor for the deceased, the burial needs to be ASAP, as soon as possible. And in a more Kabbalistic sense, the neshama leaves the body upon death, but is still unable to be released and go up to its place in heaven until the body has reached its proper place. So whereas the German authorities wanted to wait 3 days to ascertain for sure the person has died, and we'll soon see the teshuvah, the question that was posed to the Chasam Sofer, to which he responded in the way he responded, but nevertheless, we have an opposing value, a competing value, I should say, of make sure the body gets buried as quickly as possible once it's dead. And therefore, he was against this 3-day waiting period. However, since the 1970s, there's been a movement towards challenging the traditional medical definition of death. The newer definitions define death as irreversible cessations of all functions of the brain, including the brain stem. That's how they want to define death. Irreversible cessation of all functions of the brain, including the brain stem. Now, respiration, spontaneous respiration, would cease in the case of brain death, since the brain controls respiration. But the heart would keep beating, as the dead part of the brain does not control coronary function. So a person is declared by the hospitals, by the doctors, as brain dead, even though the heart is continuing on its own to beat. Now, granted, without respiration and the necessary oxygen, then the heart will soon stop beating. But with a respirator, right, the heart will carry on beating even though the brain has, officially, according to medical terms, the brain has died.
But not indefinitely.
Not indefinitely. Correct. Now, the main consideration for adopting this is the current inability to transplant. I mentioned hearts, also lungs, and livers from cadaver donors. Meaning, we need to have the heart beating in order to be able to transplant the heart, the lung, and the livers. Okay? The donor's heart must be beating spontaneously to be considered suitable to harvest those organs for transplantation. So, one of the main points where this plays the pivotal role is, as I said before, transplants, and also, as we saw in the case of the family in Toronto, in terms of pulling the plug at that point. Okay. Now, halachic opinions have been deeply divided regarding this issue. First, we're going to go through the opinions of those who consider brain death to be halachic death, and would therefore allow the pulling of the plug, would allow the transplants to be done. These include Rav Avram Shapiro, Rav Shaul Yisraeli, Rav Mordechai Eliyahu. Those are the Israeli poskim. Now, what is it all based on? So let us go to the source sheet that I've given you. Okay? The Mishnah in Yoma discusses. There are extra sheets if anybody needs. There are more on the tables. They're around. We have it both in Hebrew and in English. Okay? Misha achso bulmus. The person was seized by a certain disease of ravenous hunger, right? Upon which, if he does not partake of that food, his life is in danger. Machilanoto, we will feed him. Now this is Tractate Yoma. What does Tractate Yoma deal with? Yom Kippur. So talking about feeding this person on Yom Kippur, afilu dvarim tmein, even if it is food that is unclean, right? If I don't have that cheeseburger, that pork cheeseburger, I'm gonna die. If the person actually has this disease, whatever it is, that's what we would give him. Adshi or yainav, all right, until he gets himself back on his feet. Now, if someone was bitten by a rabid dog, they used to think that a way of healing that was feeding him from the liver of that rabid dog. Not exactly a kosher. This is not your mother's chopped liver. Okay? Now, the Mishnah says you can feed him that, not because we're against saving the person's life, but we disagree and say this is not this is not true medicine. This will not do anything. Ramat Mecharish Matir. He allows it. Further, Ramat Mecharish said, right? A person who has a problem with his throat can take certain balms, medications on Shabbat. Why? It's a suffix nefashot. Because the person's life, it's a question if the person's life is in danger. The chol suffix nefashot dochet HaShabbat. Any doubt about a person's life, right, life danger, overrides Shabbat. Mishnaf alav mapolet, a building fell onto a person. Savik usham, savik eno sham. Is he there? Is he not there? Was someone there? Was someone not there? Savik chai, savik mate. Right? If he was there, is he alive? Is he dead? Is he Jewish? Is he non-Jewish? Doesn't matter. We get in there, and even though on Shabbos we're not allowed to go digging and excavating, we get in there and do that. Matsu chai, we find that he's alive. Mafakin, keep on digging. Get him out of there. In mate, if he has died already, yanichu. Then we will leave him until after Shabbat is over, and then we will deal with that. Let's just, yeah?
With the first example, does that apply to a pregnant woman who sometimes has...
Yes, that certainly can. Yes. Let's go now into the Gemara. Now, in the Hebrew, we're still on the first page, the first side of the sources. For English, we're on the second. Tana Rabbanan, by number 1 there in the Hebrew. Ad heichan hu bodek. So they found the body. They don't know, is he alive or not? Until where do they go and check? Ad chotmo. You check his nose. Oh, so what are you checking for?
Is he breathing?
Respiration. Is he breathing? V'yesh omrim. There are those that say ad libo. You even have to check until his heart. In other words, is the heart pumping? Now, Rashi, and there's a lot of emphasis on the words of Rashi over here. I underlined it in the Hebrew sources. Ad heichanu bodek. Im dome lemet. If he seems to be dead, she'eno meziz evarav. There's no movement of his limbs. Ad heichan hu mefakeach. Until when do you continue to excavate? Ladat ha'emet. To know the truth, to verify. First opinion, the consensus opinion, until the nose. Others said, until the heart. Okay? Yes, Steve?
I was with my mother, Shalom, when she passed away, and I asked Silas about it. She stopped breathing, and we had to wait, I think, 20 minutes more after that to see if there was return of any kind of sign of life.
Yeah. Look, a person can temporarily stop breathing, right? And then, right?
Sleep apnea.
Yeah, but it could be even longer than that, though. Yeah, it could be longer than that. Now, let's go down a little further. In the English, it's just, did I mark it as number 2? It's the second paragraph in the English. And in the Hebrew, down over here where I marked number 2, Amarav Papa machloket mimata lamala. The question, the debate to the nose, to the heart, is if he was discovered, if you first encounter the person's legs. Then the question is, how far do you have to go? Can you stop at the heart, some say, or must you go all the way to the nose? Aval milamala lamata, but from top to bottom, kevan debadak le'ad chotmo, since you checked his nose, shuv eino tzarich. If there's no respiration, go no further. Tichtiv, as the verse says, Kol asher nishmat ruach chayim ba'apav. All that there is, the neshama, the soul of the spirit of life, where? Ba'apav, in his nose. So this seems to be leaning towards respiration. And if there is no respiration, perhaps, regardless of what else is going on, then death has occurred. The Shulchan Aruch, on the second side there, that's both in Hebrew and in English, Afilu metzau merutzatz. Even if you find this person, right, in a real, extremely destroyed state, at best, the person will live briefly. Mafachin, we will continue to excavate, right? We will desecrate Shabbos even to keep the person alive for a short period of time. Chaye Sha'ah, it's called. A short temporary life is also what a person can accomplish during that time with their thoughts, with their regrets, whatever it might be, can change their eternity. Ubodkin ad chotmo. The Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law rules, we check until where? Until the nose. Im lo hirgishu b'chotmo chayut. If one does not sense from his nose any life, az vaday met, then certainly the person is dead. Lo shna pagu b'rosho tchila, lo shna pagu b'raglav tchila. Right, he rules on the second part of the Gemara that we quoted, whether you encountered his legs first or his head first, you go as far as the nose. You'll pardon me? The nose knows. Okay? Right? You check the nose. Right? Is there respiration? Is there breathing? That is what we go with. Okay.
This is like this morning. This morning they're arguing.
Oh, so yeah, similar to that though. Okay, I don't want to get too far off. Okay. So once again.
But Rabbi,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but sometimes when the person stops breathing, you can revive them. Let's say somebody fell in the pool and drowned. You pull him out. You check he's not
Correct.
breathing, but you can.
Correct. Good point, Dan. We're talking about an irreversible cessation of breathing.
So how do you know if it's irreversible or reversible?
Well, if the person is brain dead, then the brain is not signaling to the muscles of the diaphragm.
Okay, but when you're digging and you check the nose, he's not breathing. Maybe you get the stone off of his body so you can do some.
Okay. Interesting, right? I don't know if they were well versed in CPR at that time, right? At this point, well, we'll see Rashi's words, right? Indoma lemate, right? Mean that he seems to be dead, right? It seems to be well past that point.
Okay.
Right? Nowadays, if someone does know CPR, and all of us should know CPR, right? And there is a possibility that we might be able to get this heart going again. So then we would continue. I would say that would still be considered a suffix, and we would continue. Okay. Now, I just want to see one more bit of a source. Okay, we're going to skip down to the bottom to the halachic response of Chasam Sofer Yoredeya 368. A question was posed. I've underlined some parts of it and I've bolded some parts of it, but we'll just go through it quickly. A question came up in a certain city. Sharofei Kohen. The doctor there was a Kohen. And according to the laws of that country, the person cannot be buried until a doctor comes and checks and testifies on him, right? And the question was that it is done. There's no hope left. The person is dead. So can a Kohen enter? A Kohen cannot come in contact with a mate.
Right.
Right? Can a Kohen enter or not? And he says, right, I'm shocked by the question. Certainly not. He brings from the Torah says that when a person received capital punishment, right, you must bury him right away. And he says, underlined there in the second paragraph, Az nimso lanu shir mita. From that point, it was given to us the point of death. Through one of three ways, he says. Either it was a mesoret, it was transmitted to us from Bali Tavim Harishonim, from earlier doctors. Even though our present-day doctors are no longer familiar with that, and the sages relied on them for many inyan and many things from the aspect of the Torah, or, further underlined, this is if it was not received from the doctors and accepted then, it was something that was received from Moshe. We call Allah Moshe Sinai. It was passed down orally from Moshe and Sinai down to us. Or, thirdly, that we relied on the pasuk that I quoted before, the Gemara quoted, Kosher Ruach Chaim Ba'apav. Anyone who has the spirit of life in their nose, Da'akol Talui Beneshima Ta'af. It's all dependent upon the breathing of the nose, as the Gemara Yuma that we just read saw, and as is ruled by the Rambam, which I didn't bring, and the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, that I did bring. So again, those who accept brain death as halachic Jewish death, because there is the cessation of breathing, even though the heart is still beating, right? They are basing it on the simple understanding of this Gemara, right? The Gemara strongly suggests that respiration is the definition of death. And if someone is brain dead, incapable of spontaneous respiration, that person is dead. And this is the opinion of the chief rabbinate in Israel. And they quote the Khatam Sofar that we said, right? This is the accepted. Everything is dependent upon the breathing from the nose.
Really?
Yes.
What if
So the person is on a respirator, but the
Okay,
person is not breathing.
Sorry, I came in
Yeah,
a bit
the
late.
person is on a respirator,
Okay.
but proclaimed brain dead, and the heart is beating, and this can go on for days, this can go on for weeks, this can go on for months.
Yeah,
Right? That's the question. What is the status?
thank you.
Now, he also brings another approach that they have from this Gemara to back up their opinion that brain death is considered halachic death because spontaneous respiration has ceased, even though the respirator is doing the job. They say that the lack of respiration that the Gemara talks about is in fact an indication that there's brain death. Because if the brain was alive, it would be sending messages. Diaphragm muscles, contract, expand, breathe, breathe, breathe. So therefore they say that brain death has always been the halachic definition of death. Because respiration is only an indicator of brain death. So the Gemara, they say, is telling you about brain death. Now this is a bit strange, where Shafter writes, right? Because we don't have any evidence that suggests that the sages knew that the brain stem is what controls respiration. Okay? The third argument that they make is the source that I skipped. Let's go to that source now. This is the Mishnah in Ohalot. Ohalot, Ohel means a tent or a roof covering. There is impurity, ritual impurity that is imparted if a person is under the same roof as something or certain things which impart tumah. Adam eino metameh. We have this both in Hebrew and English. The Mishnah, right, which is, I wrote 6:1, it's actually 1:6, pardon me. It's the first chapter, the 6th Mishnah. Adam eino metameh. A person will not impart impurity to others ad shetetzei nafsho, until his nefesh, his soul, leaves him. Afilu muguyad, afilu goses, right? In a person who is, right, dismembered, a person is goses, they say terminally ill, but it's more than terminally ill. This person is on the brink of, right, just on the doorstep of leaving this world to the next world. Zokek liyibum aportim min hayibum could be considered alive in terms of all the laws of yibum, which we're not going to go into now. Machil betruma, if he's a kohen, as long as he's alive, his wife is allowed to eat truma, right? His wife will be allowed to eat truma. Uposel betruma, if he is the child and his mother was the daughter of a Kohen married to an Israelite, but the Israelite has now died, right? Or she's divorced from him. But being that she has a son who's an Israelite, she cannot partake of her father's truma, right? Once this child will die, she could. So he will disqualify her. He's alive for all intents and purposes. Also animals. Whatever tumah they exude, it will not be until they actually died. Hutazu rashehem. Let's say you have a case, a lizard, let's say, where the head was cut off. Even though they are convulsing, right? Or you have a chicken running around without its head, right? Even after a chicken's head has been removed, it will continue to run around. Tumeyin. They will impart tumah. Kigon, for example, Zanav Shalatah, the tail of the lizard, Shima Farkaset, which convulses after being cut off. So the Mishnah says, if something is decapitated, even though it's continuing to move, it is dead. Okay? Now, we would clearly agree that if, heaven forbid, there's some sort of an accident, and the head was decapitated, even though the heart is still beating, might still be beating, I imagine it will continue beating for 20, 30, 40 seconds, whatever it might be, more or less. I'm not a cardiologist. Clearly the person is dead. well before the heart stops beating. The person is dead when the person is decapitated. So, the other factor that is brought in, third argument, is that brain death is considered to be physiological decapitation. It's as if the head is removed. Since there is no blood flow to the brain, so therefore it is what they call physiological decapitation. Those are the arguments that are made by those who advocate that brain death is halachic death. On the other hand, most leading halachic authorities reject the concept of brain death as a halachically acceptable definition of death. Right? Rav Hershel Schachter questions the analogy of a brain dead patient to one who has been decapitated. Right? They point out some earlier halachic authorities, interesting authorities. The case that was brought up was a gangrenous arm, right? Which means there is no blood flow to that arm. Can tefillin be placed upon that arm? And they rule that yes, tefillin can be placed upon that arm. So they felt it was still alive, that arm was still alive, as long as the basic circulatory system functioned for the rest of the body. Similarly, the body, the person can be considered alive even though the blood is not flowing to the brain, since it continues to circulate to the rest of the body. Rav Moshe Feinstein disagreed with the ruling about the gangrenous arm, and he said tefillin should not be put on.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Is it a symptom of brain death that the person stops inhaling and exhaling, or can they continue?
No. If they are breathing, then there's no brain death.
Okay.
If they are breathing, there's no brain death. Okay? Now, others argue, Alan Soloveitchik said, you can't make an analogy between real decapitation and brain death, right? Which is simply a functional non-activity of the brain. Others argued that the various tests to determine brain death cannot be performed because when the person is a goses, on the verge of life and death, right, the neshama, the soul, is compared to a flame on a candle. Now, when it's really flickering, the slightest motion could extinguish that flame. So too, we don't touch a goses. We don't do anything because the slightest thing that we do to that person might extinguish the flame of the neshama. But the main argument of those who reject definition is that they say that as long as the person's heart is beating, that person is alive. And they go back to that Rashi. Rashi said, explain the Gemara, im doma lemeit.
Right.
If in all intents and purposes, this person seems to be dead, then you check the nose for breathing.
Right.
But they say this person is clearly not domel lemeit. He doesn't appear to be dead. Why not? His heart is beating. So this very Gemara is talking about when the person is in any way that we can ascertain dead. So what's the final way of you determining that death? Checking for breathing. But in the case where the person is identifiably not dead, they argue, identifiably not dead, that the heart is beating, then clearly that's not what the Gemara is referring to. Right? Rashi said he does not move any of his limbs. If one of the limbs is moving, he's considered alive. They say, well, the heart moving will be considered a limb moving that indicates that this person is alive. Now, the Chatam Sofer also says, and I highlighted at the very bottom of the notes, Avakol she'acher shemutal ke'even domain. Right? Again, he's arguing about this delaying of the pronouncing of dead, and thereby delaying the burial. He says, once the person is lying there, ke'even, like a stone, domain, non-moving, ve'ein bo shum defika, there is no heartbeat. And if then the breathing stops, all we have is the guidance from our holy Torah, shehu mate, that the person is dead at that point. And that's the normal pattern, right? The heart stops beating. At that point, the brain will no longer be fed. The organs will no longer be fed the oxygen that they need. And soon after, the breathing is going to stop. V'lo yalinu oto. And therefore, going back to the question that was posed to him, do not wait with the body at that time. And if you're a Kohen, don't go in there, which was the question that was posed to him. So even the Chasam Sofer mentioned this idea of ein bo shum dvika. There is no heartbeat. So in addition to Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, we mentioned Rav Bleich and Rav Schachter. The long list of poskim do not accept brain death as death include Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Rav Shalom Elyashiv, Rav Nissim Karelitz, the Tzitz Eliezer, Eliezer Waldenberg, Diana Yitzchak Weiss, Rav Mordechai Willig, and Rav Shmuel Vosner. According to these poskim, the Gemara, the Rambam that we didn't see, the Shulchan Aruch and the Gemara that we did see, teach that the absence of spontaneous respiration indicates a lack of life in the body. It's not an independent criterion for death. It's not that will determine is the person dead or alive. That's an indication that death has occurred. But if that is, right, and that was certainly the case before there were respirators, because once spontaneous respiration ceased, like I said before, cardiac function ended soon after lack of oxygen going to the heart. But again, the Gemara is not saying that is the criterion to determine death has occurred. That is an indicator that death has occurred. But in a case where the heart is beating, and like Rashi said, he's not like an Evan domain, or like the Chasam Sofer said, he's not an Evan domain, and like Rashi says, it's not that he's Eino Mezes Evarav, they say, then the fact that he's not breathing will not render the person dead. And the majority of poskim thus believe that as long as a part of the body continues to function spontaneously, the individual is still considered to be halachically alive.
But when you say spontaneously, but then what about, medical?
The heart is continuing spontaneously.
Yeah.
So the person is not dead. So now for you to pull out the respirator is in effect killing the person. According to this view, which is basically, I believe, it seems to be the majority view. Rabbi Jafta certainly represents as the majority view. And there's another factor over here, right? When there is a suffix, when there is a doubt, right? So let's say it was an even group on either side. Those that say that it is death, those that say it's not death, right? So, right, if it is death, right, then you're allowed to pull out the plug, right? Anything wrong in leaving the plug in? No. But you're allowed to pull out the plug. On the other hand, if it's not death, then if you pull out the plug, it's murder. So even if it were, in my mind, an even balance, then logic would dictate that halachic ruling needs to be, don't pull out that plug. Now you might argue, yes, but in the case of a transplant, there is a competing value of saving someone else's life. But nevertheless, we don't take a chance on murdering someone, right? Even if that might, or definitely will, save someone else's life. Okay, now, Just one added point over here.
So, Rabbi,
Yes.
so under no circumstances, even if the doctors say this person won't live another day.
Oh, that's definitely. Look, in today's world, something that unfortunately I get to see a lot, the approach of the medical world, certainly of the hospitals, is to free up the bed, and an emphasis on quality of life. And this person is going to be dying soon anyhow, so why should we do anything? Why should we prolong their agony, perhaps they describe it, whatever it might be? And of course, we have to do everything that we can to alleviate pain, discomfort that the person might be feeling. But the basics need to be given to them. Basics is respiration, oxygen, hydration, nutrition, though at that point, there's no real point in giving nutrition, meaning that they're not going to die from malnutrition, right? But to hold back the things that the basics that they need, and basic antibiotics, right, need to be given. Any heroic measures do not need to be taken, right? But the fact that they're going to die tomorrow anyhow is, right, by our standards, it's murder to do anything today. I just want to add one other point, two other points, and then we'll take some other points you guys that you want to make. Now, okay, an issue that's brought up: a person with end-stage ALS or polio cannot breathe without machinery. So according to this, would that person be considered dead? And certainly the person is not considered dead. Rav Moshe Tendler, who is a strong proponent for accepting brain death as halachic death, he contends with this issue, and he writes, right, the classic definition of death is absence of respiration in a person who appears dead. The person is fully alive but needs help with his breathing. It would not apply to him. Okay. Now, this why, and I just want to end with this point, and then Steve and anyone else who wants to add in. There's something called a healthcare proxy, right?
A halachic what?
Right. A halachic medical directive, more than a halachic will, right? And that is an important thing to have in place. If you don't want the doctors and the hospitals, and if I could be a little bit caustic, and the insurance companies making the decision, then you would want to sign a healthcare proxy, which says that it should be, right, this person or these people, right, people have asked me to sign, they can put my name down, that halachic decision will be made by me, right, or by another accepted Orthodox rabbi following Orthodox Jewish practice, right? Because the momentum of the world and the hospital scene today is very much in that of ending things quickly at a point where it's hopeless anyhow. Why push it further? Steve.
You maybe kind of dealt with it. It's extraordinary measures to keep a person alive. Can a Jewish person say, I don't want extraordinary? And I assume that,
Yeah.
that would always imply to have the hydration and the
Correct.
oxygen.
Correct. That would not be considered taking one's own life, right? Yes, that would be considered. A person could say,
I've had enough.
I can't go for dialysis every day. I can't spend 6 to 8 hours a day doing dialysis. Enough, right? that a person, it's always tragic, but a person would be able to make, say, heroic measures. Enough. Yeah. Okay. Sorry for a bit of a somber topic. I saw a very good quote, right? That with all the talk today about the challenges of artificial intelligence, I think the real problem is authentic stupidity. Okay, we'll end on that.
Good.